Okay, next we're going to talk about different data mining methods. Generally speaking, there are many different methods have been proposed and used, and they can be classified into two groups: predictive versus informative. Okay, predictive, also known as supervised learning, whereas informative is also known as explorative or unsupervised learning. Okay, with supervised learning, we know both the input and the output of the cases that we are trying to analyze. Okay, whereas in unsupervised learning, we only have some input cases that we are trying to explore or trying to identify patterns, association, and so on. We don't know the what happened in the past. In other words, okay. So that's the main difference between the two. We're going to talk about the individual methods next. All right. First, predictive methods or supervised learning includes basically two major techniques or methods. One is called decision trees. Second is regression. And again, I'm going to talk about each in turn. And then for the second group, we have informative or unsupervised learning. And there are four major methods: clustering, ABC classification, association analysis, and weighted score tables. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these four as well in detail. All right, the first group of methods related to predictive data mining includes a decision tree. Okay, so the first predictive method is decision tree. As shown here, decision tree is used to identify the factors that are important to a business decision. Okay, the example here, we're trying to identify the factors that determine past consumer or customer behavior, and then use the pattern to predict future behavior. Okay, in other words, again, we know both the input and the output. So for instance, we had at least 3 customers in the past. They have attributes like their income, their age, their credit rating, and so on. Okay, so those are input variables. Okay, at the same time, we also know the outcome or output variable, which is the buying behavior. We know each customer whether they have bought some products from us or not. Okay, so yes or no based on past history. Okay, so we know what happened in the past to certain customers. Okay, and then based on the history, we're going to derive certain rules that we can use then to predict new customers in terms of whether they will buy or not. Okay, so now you see 2 additional customers are recorded, and again, we have some input variables, and then we are trying to predict for each customer whether they will buy or not. Okay, based on a decision tree that we're going to build. So on the next slide, the decision tree is shown here. Okay, again, we have 3 input variables, right, or factors, and the decision tree will display those factors in a tree-like fashion. Okay, but notice that in a computer tree, it is always upside down. Okay, the root is shown at the top, which is also the most important factor. In this example, the most important factor happens to be age. Okay, because we have a rule that says if a customer is at least 35 years old, then the chances of buying is what? 100%. Okay, so that's the single most important factor, age. In other words, we are trying to target, I guess, more mature customers, right? So if you have somebody that walks into the store who is younger than 35, then what happens? Okay, according to the tree, we're going to use the second factor, which is his or her income. Okay, and then if the income is less than $5,000, then again we have a rule that says you won't buy. Okay, and that's pretty. The probability is pretty high also. Okay, 100% won't buy. But if it's the income is greater than $5,000, then we're going to look at the third factor, which is credit rating. Okay, and again, we have two possible outcomes. If it's excellent, then probably the customer will not buy. But if it's fair, then he or she will probably buy. Okay, so the tree tells us very clearly of the factors that we consider, or the input variables that we consider, which one is the most important, and also what the rules are in terms of the probability of buying. Okay, we can predict with certain confidence the buying behavior of a new customer. Practical applications of decision trees. Again, you can see there are many applications, including to identify customer fraud, and also to identify customers who are likely to stop buying from us, or customer churn. Okay. Second type of predictive methods are regression. Some of you probably have learned before from your stat classes. Regression is used to come up with a model that says, given an input variable, I can then predict what will happen to an outcome variable in the future. Okay, and the regression can be a linear regression or non-linear regression. Okay, if it's linear, that means the regression line is kind of like a straight line. If it's non-linear, then the regression line is not a straight line. Okay, as illustrated here. So if we have one input variable, okay, such as price, then we're trying to find out what will happen to our sales if we reduce our prices. Okay, so one linear regression line can tell us to what extent our sales will increase based on a reduction of price. Okay, then nonlinear regression, we have several input variables, and the regression line is not a straight line, but still we can try to determine or predict what would happen given the changes in age, in income, in household size, and so on. How would those factors impact our subscription? Okay, so that's a nonlinear regression, which is the second predictive method that a company can use in data mining. A question on predictive data mining methods.